Hey guys, so I know I'm doing quite a bit of covering old topics. However, there's like at least 6 months worth of content on my channel that's recorded with a garbage mic and bad scripting that I think deserves a better video, so that's what we're doing today. I'll probably be unlisting the older version of this video. However, if you still want to see it, it'll still be in the playlist that it's put in. Don't worry, I have a video on pro ship I'm working on, so this isn't just going to be like my only content going forward. That being said, this video is going to be covering my own kind of views on the fat liberation and HAES movement, as well as some of the dodgy history surrounding it. So let's just get into it. So before I go any further, I want to make it very clear that I do not support commenting on someone's weight, and I especially do not support being cruel or mean to people because of it, and this includes the "I'm just worried" type comments to anyone that you are not a caregiver or doctor for. Also, trigger warning for this video that it will discuss calories, eating disorders, both restrictive and binging, and medical malpractice. This video is also not aimed at anyone whose weight is due to a disability, illness, or medication, people who are aware obesity is unhealthy but do not wish to change their habits or do not have access to proper help to do so, or people who are actively trying to lose weight. This video is purely aimed at people who participate in and spread the beliefs held by those in the fat liberation and health at every size communities, and no one else, regardless of their weight or diet. In modern conversations, both these communities, fat liberation and HAES, claim to fight for the freedom, safety, proper medical care, and respect of fat people, most notably fat women, and focus very heavily on POC and LGBT or quote-unquote queer fat people. I personally do not like the word queer as an LGBT person, but it is used very frequently by this community, so I will be using it going forward. While these two beliefs tend to go hand in hand, and I may use them interchangeably throughout parts of the video, I want to talk about them separately here for a moment. The term HAES, or Health at Every Size, originated from a book written in 1982 titled Health at Every Size, Diets Don't Work by Lindo Bacon. I will confess I have not read this book, so I am not going to go too deep into it, but on a basic level, they claim that obesity is not as unhealthy as doctors make it out to be, and that they have gone on to inspire a plethora of health and medical-related claims from proponents of HAES and fat activism, ranging from pointing out genuine medical neglect to outright denying that obesity is a causal factor in things such as heart disease or type 2 diabetes. HAES on the surface is not inherently bad, in my opinion. One of the few areas that I agree with them is that it's true that fat people routinely face medical neglect due to any and all health problems being attributed to weight, often leading to undiagnosed illnesses being ignored till they need emergency care or have a greatly decreased quality of life. If HAES were only about encouraging doctors to search for causes beyond weight, not ignore weight-related issues or stop taking weight into account, mind you, I wouldn't be so against it. However, unfortunately, even the agreeable parts of HAES become warped when discussing with its supporters for a few minutes. While yes, they point out exactly what I just talked about, and rightfully so, they are also often angered by doctors suggesting any health issue could be weight-related, and even if it's something that has been proven to be caused by obesity, or if doctors are still searching for an alternative cause, simply claiming their weight could be worsening a condition or an accurate blame for weight is deemed untrue, often leading to people completely dismissing the idea of doctors mistreating fat people at all because it's blown up into this massive exaggeration and taking issues with actual medicine alongside malpractice. It also doesn't stop there. It's common to see people make claims that diseases known to be common or almost inevitable past a certain weight to be completely unrelated to their weight, or even attributed to the supposed oppression we'll get into more later. Claims that since heart disease can also be brought on by chronic stress, for example, that the drastically higher amount of both cases and death in obese people are in fact not due to their weight, but due to the stress they have from experiencing fat phobia. This often ignores the fact that genuinely oppressed groups such as Black people, LGBT people, and religious minorities do not see such a massive spike in heart disease like obese people do, and that there is medical research to explain why obesity causes heart disease. One of the most integral parts to HAES, originating from the book, is that your weight is out of your control and dieting does not work. Many people within HAES believe that your body has a natural weight that it leans towards, and fighting that is not only futile but unhealthy. While there is merit to the idea that some people are naturally a bit bigger or smaller than others, this belief tends towards the extreme with HAES, and is only applied to people on the overweight and obese end of the spectrum. No one's body naturally leans to 400 plus pounds the same way that no adult's body naturally leans to 80 pounds. The BMI is admittedly very flawed and has a very fucked history, but being 20 pounds in the overweight category is drastically different than being immobile because of your weight. This also, of course, becomes a talking point when dieting is discussed, something that we'll get more into later. The problem here is that restriction doesn't work long term. HAES advocates love to point out a mysterious statistic that no one can seem to find the source of, that 95% of diets fail. While I think it's rather pointless to quantify how many dieting attempts fail, considering there's a wide range of results desired, such as muscle gain, weight loss, higher protein, or ethical and environmental choices like veganism, as well as what actually qualifies as a diet in itself, there is an actual problem here, and it's that dieting does not work, one, if it's unsustainable, which many commercial and highly restrictive diets are, and two, if it is not a healthy choice of food, calorically, nutritionally, or quantity-wise. Many people see diets as a temporary thing that you stop doing, and therefore are more willing to heavily restrict how much or what kinds of foods they eat. The problem, however, is that not only is this not sustainable, but you will gain the weight back once you return to your previous habits. It's thermodynamics and biology that calories in, calories out works. You just have to make it sustainable. You have to not stop it eventually. To many of these people, eating 2,000 calories a day, something that the average person would maintain their weight with and is fairly like an average amount to eat without restriction. People don't really have to try and eat 2,000 calories or under. It is too restrictive for them because it is restriction at all. Ultimately, a major issue around HAES is that it's just blatant lies about people's health. I'll link a few videos from people who've left the fat activism movement and HAES movement and how they were harmed by this misinformation below, as I can't speak to it personally myself, but I highly encourage you to go watch those videos. Medical misinformation can and does kill people. That is the problem, ultimately. And not only that, but the cesspool of misinformation and emotionally charged lying has gone on to inform much of the fat activism movement, something that I'll be moving on to. Fat liberation, also called fat acceptance, fat positivity, radical self-love, and often, but not always, a synonym for body positivity, is a loose set of beliefs around supporting fat people and fighting fat phobia. Despite many, many claims that fat liberation originated from quote-unquote fat black queer women, the early days of fat liberation were started by a man by the name of Bill Fabry, or Fabry, not sure how to say it, a self-proclaimed fat admirer who had a love and arguably fetish for bigger women and created NAFA, or National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance. I won't be going too much into this history, as it could be an even longer video than this one on its own, but I will link a great video about that topic that is longer than this one. What you need to take from this mainly, however, is that fat liberation was not the creation of the supposed fat black queer women, as often said by notably white fat activists, but a straight-sized man and others like him who were attracted to fat women. This doesn't inherently, dismiss everything that they say just because the origin isn't what they say it is, but considering how often the specific phrase fat black queer women is thrown out, wanted to put it in there. Currently, a few big main focuses of fat activists are accessibility, or a world, quote-unquote, not built with fat people in mind, intersectionality between them, often calling themselves people in marginalized bodies, and mostly POC and disabled individuals, and the problems with diet culture and thin privilege. I'm going to be combining the point about disabled people and fat accessibility because as a physically disabled person who uses a wheelchair, this feels especially relevant and frustrating to me. A few common points of quote-unquote accessibility issues claimed by fat activists are plane seats, booths/armchairs at restaurants, narrow walkways, and things like attached school desks. While I'm not going to deny it sucks to have these things be problems, the degree at which these issues are compared to handicap accessibility is beyond infuriating, to say the least. It's not uncommon for me to go out and have at least one issue with accessibility, if not have an entire ordeal about it, pretty much every time I go to an event that I haven't been there before, basically. Off the top of my head, at Pride, my chair had to be lifted over a step by staff in a narrow doorway. I went to karaoke with my family and partner and was met with an entire flight of stairs and no elevator. Pretty much any public space with very thick carpet makes a manual wheelchair very difficult to push, and a Joann's fabric that we go to on a regular basis with random poles in the middle of aisles. I could go on. For one, none of these accessibility issues could be easily solved by taking better care of my health. I cannot eat differently or take medication and entirely avoid these problems. 2, I cannot simply seek accommodation unless demolishing a pole is accommodation. Unlike just asking for 2 plane seats or a table that's not a booth to mitigate them. Fat activists often claim that it's embarrassing or unfair that they need to seek these accommodations, and I don't doubt that. However, I'm sorry, but asking for a table instead of a booth is not the same as having 2 bartenders squeeze your wheelchair through a tiny doorway over a step that would have been criminally easy to put a ramp on. Ultimately, what it boils down to, however, is the fact that having these accessibility needs is avoidable for them. You do not need an extra plane seat, or you can't not fit in a booth at only a few pounds overweight. You have made choices with consequences and then refuse to seek help to stop the problems from continuing instead blame society and hijack genuine issues disabled people deal with on a daily basis to legitimize the fact that you believe the world needs to accommodate your inability to change. This also becomes even more frustrating when fat activists use phrases like quote-unquote moralizing health, something often used to say, yes, some fat people are unhealthy, but that criticizing that is placing a moral judgment on the act of being unhealthy. This is often used while pulling in the, well, what about disabled people card, saying some people just aren't capable of being fully healthy due to their disability, and then going on to compare unhealthy fat people to us. While I do agree some people moralize health, and it's something we'll go into on the section on diet culture, I don't think simply saying obesity is unhealthy is moralizing health, nor do I think it's comparable to those of us who live with chronic illness. While I acknowledge people on the severe end of obesity pretty much universally struggle with an eating disorder and mental health issues, making seeking help, let alone putting it into action, difficult, there is a massive difference between denying obesity causes health issues and saying therefore you don't need help, and a reluctance or even fear towards pursuing help. I myself have dealt with anorexia for all of my adult life and as a teenager, and I can tell you firsthand that even wanting help for an ED is a huge step. However, for most people with an ED, including people with binge eating disorders who aren't in these spaces, the reluctance often comes from the idea of making such a drastic change in your life and losing control, and what that change could mean for you, whether that's gaining weight or losing an unhealthy coping mechanism like binging, or something else. Not a moral and ideological position that seeking help is wrong, or even according to some of these people, a genocide against fat people. These people often claim as well that they are disabled because of the immobility or exhaustion and pain that comes with such large amounts of obesity, while also claiming that obesity doesn't cause health issues, making them feel all the more justified in saying that obesity is unhealthy is moralizing health and comparing themselves to disabled people. Well, I think it's completely inappropriate to comment on anyone's health that you're not directly responsible for or very, very, very close to. Making generalized statements about biology and medical care is not that. And to see fat activists claim that no, obesity doesn't cause health issues, but then lump themselves in with disabled people despite the lack of any other medical issues is irritating, to say the least. This also leads us into the topic of diet culture, something that I think fat activists almost get right, but just like HAES goes off into such an extreme that it's hard to say I agree. Fat activists often fight against diet culture, and just like moralizing health, are against the moralization of certain foods. I overall agree with this. As someone with a restrictive ED, moral judgment placed on certain food, even when consumed only on occasion, is bad and only serves to guilt people, not encourage healthy choices. Again, however, the extremes come in whenever fat activists claim that placing any level of control over what you eat is fat phobia, both in the literal sense that you are scared of becoming fat and the idea of quote-unquote, how must it make your fat friends feel when you're scared to look like them? The idea of doing anything other than eating what you want when you want is a moral failing to them, despite being against moralizing food. While I can understand the sentiment of this, the way it's discussed almost reminds me of an inverse of pro-anaspaces, egging on each other's disordered eating and attacking anyone who questions it. This also becomes an almost kind of infuriating type of ironic whenever fat activists claim that people with restrictive eating disorders are fat phobic and that to cure their eating disorder, they need to overcome their fat phobia. Even telling people who are talking about their eating disorder recovery, even if fully recovered, that they are promoting diet culture by having an eating disorder. And that the feelings of the hypothetical fat friends of this person feeling like they don't want to look like them are drastically more important than the actual very severe health consequences of living with a restrictive eating disorder, even if you never make it to a critically low weight. It's also frustrating on a personal level that, as someone with a physical disability, these people tell me that I would be included in their activism even though I'm not a fat person because I lived in a quote-unquote marginalized body as a disabled person, but then also go on to tell me that my general existence is fat-phobic for having anorexia. Obviously, there is a lot more to fat activism and health at every size than what I've gone over here, and I've already spent 13 minutes of the video basically explaining what these people believe and saying why it's a problem. So I'm going to continue on with, I guess, the kind of more generalized part of this video, but just know that there's more than what I talked about, and this could be a much longer video if I had the patience for After Effects to render one. I think really just the overarching big issues with fat activism and HAES is repeatedly comparing themselves to marginalized groups who face daily discrimination from things that people around them may not even realize are discrimination, such as inaccessibility, and tack themselves onto these movements, whether it be with using phrases like fat black queer women, despite the fact that that's completely unrelated, and saying things like, quote-unquote, fat phobia is racist, despite the fact that it's really, yes, there are obviously Western beauty standards that are a problem, but people are not significantly more prone to being overweight, at least not to a notable degree, or anything other than socioeconomic factors based on their race. Obviously, everything I talked about with disability being beyond infuriating, and saying that they are oppressed in a legal sense, while also claiming to fight for people who are genuinely oppressed in a legal sense, and then disregarding those people's well-being as soon as they don't agree with them. And of course, the medical misinformation surrounding HAES and fat activism that leads people to neglecting their health and becoming ill on the basis of these ideologies. It's also extremely common to the point where it's basically a trope for fat activists to outcast people who were previously fat and disregard all of their experiences living as a fat person because they lost weight. Some current and obvious examples being Rebel Wilson and Adele, that despite living as a fat person for 30 plus years, their recent weight loss makes all of their opinions on living as a fat person, all of their experiences living as a fat person, basically null because they're a traitor. And saying that the only acceptable time to lose weight is that if it happens naturally through what they call joyful movement, or basically exercise because it's fun, not with the attempt of health, or because of their idea that a body naturally leans in a certain direction, and if you don't make any actual active changes, but you just kind of end up losing weight. Something that makes a lot of people in fat activism spaces, especially younger people and people who aren't creators, scared to lose weight even if they want to or need to for their health, because they will be ousted from a community that they have heavily ingrained themselves in and they see as a support system. To be completely honest, in my opinion, I think that health at every size in particular is very, very similar to pro-Ana and pro-Mia spaces. You don't know what those are. They are basically majority online spaces of people with restrictive eating disorders encouraging each other's disordered behavior, often making fun of larger people or using them as quote-unquote inspiration to lose weight, and glorifying the idea of being sick and of being deathly ill with an eating disorder. As someone who has dealt with anorexia for a very long time, at the worst of my eating disorder, when I was a critically low weight, I lurked in these spaces. Please do not cancel me. I didn't post anything in them. I just looked at them. But I can see so many similarities between the way that the opposite end of the spectrum is spoken about the way that food is spoken about, and the fact that these people say they're against moralizing food, but also moralize quote-unquote healthy eating, and who ridicule and oust and attack anyone who leaves the weight category that classifies them as part of this group. This isn't to say that fat activism is as bad as pro-Ana. I don't think it is, but it's very frustrating to see all of these similarities in it, while they are also claiming that basically encouraging each other's eating disorders is activism. And not only is it activism, but they are oppressed and ignored, and they are sometimes even seeing themselves as more oppressed than people in real marginalized groups because people don't acknowledge that they're oppressed. And the only area that I think that there is any kind of systematic discrimination is something I talked about at the beginning, the issue with doctors. But even that is blown out to a degree where they can't genuinely have a conversation about medical malpractice among fat people because anything acknowledging weight is medical abuse. At the end of the day, I don't think that fat activism is helping fat people. I think if it were toned down by 100%, the ideas about diet culture and about medical care would be beneficial, and they're things that I personally would advocate for and agree with them on, even if I disagree with them on everything else. But they are inseparable from the rest of the harm caused by the movement at this point, not only by the fact that the people promoting them refuse to separate them, but the fact that the ideas themselves have become very, very warped. And it's sad that because a lot of people are understandably adverse and aggressive to hearing what fat activists say, especially considering how antagonistic they can be, that these genuine problems do often get ignored because people decide to take one side or the other and can't take a median stance and pick out the good things and throw away the bad. Overall, I just think it's really sad, to be completely honest. It's sad and it's frustrating. And I wish that there was something that could be done, but unfortunately this is kind of one of those areas where a lot of people who are actually the major voices in it are not going to listen because they see any kind of criticism as a personal attack. But I can hope that people who maybe aren't creators will stop supporting them, or will see things like this or see other videos like the ones I linked below and reconsider their positions, because you can't be a creator if no one is listening to you. That's really all I got for this video. I hope it was educational, I guess. Please, please, please check out the videos in my description. They are great. Not just the videos themselves, but the channels they come from. Obviously, like I said, I can't talk about some of this stuff from personal experience, and I think that that's really important in this area to show how this kind of information affects people, as well as some of the history that I just didn't have the time to go into that I think is interesting. So that's all I got for today. Thanks for watching, guys. Ha det!
The populace in prayer, I look at 'em talking to the